In this video, we're going to talk about why dividing by zero is called undefined. And in a previous video, we explained and saw many different ways as to why you can't divide by zero. 12 divided by zero equals what? Well, my favorite way to consider it was using the opposite of division, so multiplication. Like, for example, we looked at 12 divided by 4 is what? Well, we know the answer is 3. That's because 4 times 3 is 12. 12 can be created from 3 times the 4. And so we know that 12 divided by 4 is 3 because 4 times 3 is 12. And so we thought of the same thing over here with dividing by 0. Well, 12 divided by 0 is what? Well, we can think about the multiplication. 0 multiplied with what would give you 12? Well, let me write that out. 12 would be what magic number multiplied with 0? And we can see here that, there isn't such a number. 0 times 0 is not 12. 0 times 12 is not 12. 0 times 1 is not 12. There's just no such number. And so at first you might think that there's just like no solution. And I totally get why we would call it that, no solution. But we actually have a better phrase for it, a better word. We actually call it undefined. And you might think about like, why would we call it undefined and not just no solution? Well, what does it mean to define something, and what does it mean for something to be undefined? Well, if I had like a vocabulary word, if I just told you the word metacognition, if you know what metacognition is, then great. But if you don't know what it is, what it means, then you need to look up the definition. And so a definition would describe or establish like what the heck this thing is. Same thing over here. In fact, let's get rid of the word metacognition. That's not our focus. Look it up in a dictionary if you need to. But we want to define, maybe, we could try and define what this is. 0 times what could be 12? Well, some people might say, all right, let's define it. Let's say that 12 divided by 0 is, I couldn't find a number that works, so let me just make something up. Let me define it. Let's say it's happy face. And so there we go. The definition of 12 divided by 0 is happy face. But of course, that also means that 0 times happy face must be 12. And so I can say that 12 is equal to happy face times 0. And so there we go. Problem solved, right? Why do we call it undefined? I just defined it. I said this is what it is. I established it and I described it. Well, the problem occurs when we think about something like this. Well, that's 12 divided by 0. What's 11 divided by 0, right? Well, easy answer, you might say, hey, it's just happy face, isn't it? Like, we just defined that kind of thing. Well, there's a problem. I can't say that this is also happy face. And the reason being, and that's supposed to be a happy face. The reason being is because 0 times happy face can't be 11. I thought we said that happy face times 0 was actually not 11, but I thought that was 12. Like, this is a bad definition. Like, it could be two different things. Happy face could be 12 divided by 0, or happy face could be 11 divided by 0. So, that's a bad way to define or establish an answer. Okay, well, maybe let's just fix this pretty easy. Let's just say that 11 divided by 0 is sad face. There we go. Problem solved, right? 12 divided by 0 is happy face, and so 11 divided by 0 is sad face. We've got a definition for each of these. There. Happy face is 12 divided by 0. Sad face is 11 divided by 0. Problem solved, right? Not exactly. Here's the issue. If we think about this, the issue is, what about other numbers like, what about 10 divided by 0? What about 9 divided by 0? What about 3.7 divided by 0? What about pi divided by 0? I'm hoping you see here that there's a big problem. Happy face is 12 divided by 0. Sad face is 11 divided by 0. Well, what should 10 divided by 0 be? Maybe like angry face? I don't know. What about 9 divided by 0? Should it be like, let me just draw like a butterfly? Okay, just bear with me. Pretend that's Looks like that's pretty good. In other words, you can see the problem here is there's a whole bunch of numbers. Spoiler alert, there's an infinite number of numbers. What about 1.38 divided by 0? In other words, for each of these things, I would have to define a new answer. I'd have to define an answer for this one, and for pi divided by 0, and 1.38 divided by 0, and then what about 1.381 divided by 0? I'm hoping you realize here that this is a bad idea. I don't want to have to define a new thing for each of these numbers, for all infinite numbers. So what we do is, mathematicians, we're not lazy, we're efficient. We just say, hey, we're not going to do this. This is a bad thing. We're going to have to create basically a whole new number system, a new answer for each of these problems. So we don't even try and define it. We leave it as undefined, and we say that the answer to this is undefined. And I think that's a brilliant idea. Mathematicians are very clever and smart. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, before we finish this video, I want to consider something else. What about 0 divided by 0? This one's kind of interesting, and it's kind of a special situation. Let me scroll over, or actually I'll scroll down. Let's talk about 0 divided by 0. 0 divided by 0 is a little bit unique. Well, let's do our normal thinking. We might say, hey, it's undefined. And if you say it's undefined, I get that. Dividing by 0, we would normally say is undefined. We haven't defined it. But this one's kind of special. If I think about 0 divided by 0, I could just think about 0 times what gives you 0. Or in other words, the 0 on top has to equal something multiplied with the 0 that we were going to divide with, but now we can multiply with. Now let's think about this situation. 0 times what is 0? Well, hold on a second. I know that 0 times 1 is 0. I also know that 0 times 2 is 0. I even know that 0 times 1.38, put that in parentheses here since that decimal could look like a multiply, that's also 0. In fact, 0 times pi is also 0. So wait a minute. There's a bunch of numbers I could multiply with 0 to get 0. 0 times what is 0? A lot of stuff. In fact, you might think of this answer could be infinite solution. And let's spell infinite correctly. Infinite solution. Infinite solutions. Now, I totally get that if you say infinite solutions. But we actually have a better answer. We could still say undefined, but in calculus, we actually see that there's another way to consider this, that sometimes you can actually find an answer in calculus. Now that's beyond the scope of this video, but I want to just introduce a special word. In fact, it's special, so I'll put it in blue. We actually call this indeterminate. Indeterminate. We can't determine what it is. I mean, honestly, it could be any of these answers over here. The answer could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 1.38, it could be pi. So it could be any of these, but right now we can't determine which one we want, which one it should be. But in calculus, you can determine it sometimes. So right now it's in an indeterminate form. In fact, I'll put that word form here. It's an indeterminate form. We might be able to determine it once we know some calculus skills. Now, speaking of that, let me just throw this out to you, that 0 over 0 in calculus is an indeterminate form. There's a few other situations in calculus that I'll let you think about on your own. Infinity divided by infinity is also indeterminate. Or 0 multiplied with infinity is also indeterminate. 1 to the infinite power, meaning like 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. We can't always determine what that is. You might think, well, that's just 1. Multiply with 1. Nah, check it out. In calculus, things get interesting. What about infinity to the 0 power? You were often told that anything to the 0 power is 1. Well, not exactly anything. Also this, what about 0 to the 0 power? If you have nothing to the 0 power, what would that be? I thought anything to the 0 power was 1. Well, this one's also interesting. So check out these other forms that are indeterminate forms. But for the most part, to wrap this video up, what we know is that when you divide by 0, it should be undefined.